Our city's FOIP statement is that personal information provided in submissions relating to planning and development matters is collected under the authority of Section 230 and 636 of the Municipal Government Act, RSA 2000 CM 26, and or Section 33C of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, RSA 2000 CF 25, for the purpose of receiving public participation in planning and development decision-making. Information collected will be treated in accordance with the privacy protection provisions of Part 2 of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. Please note that public meetings are sometimes video recorded and or may be transcribed. The meetings may be made available for viewing on the city's public website or forums, either using the recording or the transcription. The recordings could include a full visual and audio recording of all presenters and any presentations. If you have questions regarding the collection and use of your personal information, please contact the city's FOIP coordinator at foip@stalbert.ca or 780-418-6663.
Thank you, Tracy. I know that that's not super exciting, but it's very important information, isn't it? That's great. Kyle, if you move to the next slide, please. Tracy, I think you're still on for safety moment, then we'll give you a break. How's that?
Sounds great. So another item we like to take a moment to talk about is safety, and our safety moment topic for this presentation is about driving. It is important to avoid distractions such as mobile devices while driving, and try to avoid aggressive driving, and always be patient and courteous to others. And that is our safety moment. So I'll pass it back to Michelle to walk us through some of the meeting etiquette.
Thank you, Tracy. So we're all online, obviously. I think we're all used to being on Zoom, and we know how this works. There are icons at the bottom. You're able to, if you click on the reactions thing, you can put your hand up. So if you have a question, please use that. We'll be watching that. We'll also be watching the chat. If the presentation is continuing and you have a question and you don't want to interrupt, then just put your question in the chat. We'll be monitoring that as well. Please remember to mute your microphone if you're not speaking. It helps with the quality of the audio for everybody else. And most importantly, we're here today to listen to or to hear the draft of the St. Albert ASP. This is something that the group here from Stantec and the City of St. Albert have been working on over the last few months since we last met. And we want to recognize that they're doing their job, they're doing their best. So let's be hard on the issues, but easy on people. These guys they're pretty nice people. So we want to make sure that we have a respectful conversation. We also, I think it's important to commit yourself to the conversation, listen generously. You might hear some viewpoints that are different from your own, but perhaps if you're listening generously, you might learn something, and that might be beneficial. Finally, some of you may have lots of questions, and if I interrupt you, I apologize in advance. I really want to make sure that everybody has a chance to speak. And so what I'm going to try to avoid, it's a little trickier online, I'm going to try to avoid multiple questions where possible so that others have an opportunity to speak. With that, I think we're on to introductions, Kyle, are we? And we're on to the agenda, sorry. I don't color within the lines very well. My name is Michelle, and I work for Stantec, and it is my pleasure to be facilitating tonight's meeting. We're going to have a presentation by Tracy. She's going to start us off on the framework and the process and schedule. Scott Cole, he's my boss, as many of you might remember from the last meeting, so I'll try to be nice to him. He's going to talk about the phase 1 engagement, what we heard, and he'll try to explain what has been incorporated into this draft ASP. Kyle will then walk us through the proposed land use concept. We'll probably have some breaks in between those presentations for some questions, and then for sure at the end we'll make sure that we have we leave enough time for a facilitated Q&A session. So Tracy, did you want to introduce anyone from your team here?
Sure. We have Christian Benson. He is from our Economic Development Department, and myself from the city as well. I'm a planner, and I'll pass it over to Scott to introduce the rest of the team from Stantec.
Perfect. Thanks, Tracy. Good evening, everyone. As Michelle introduced herself already, I am a colleague of Michelle's, and I am the project manager on behalf of Stantec. We have Kyle Whittu here, who is our lead planner on the area structure plan. And I guess also we do have a court reporter here, Diana here, who's taking all of the notes as we go through our open house tonight.
Thank you very much, Scott. So I guess we pass it back to you, Tracy, to start us off with a discussion of the planning framework, please.
Yes. So we'll start with the planning framework. Area structure plans are statutory documents that provide a framework for future development of undeveloped areas. So on the hierarchy to the right, we see that ASP sit fairly in the middle of the overall planning framework. As we move from the top to the bottom of the hierarchy, the level of detail increases in terms of land use designations and policies, and each level must conform to its previous level. So for example, area structure plans must conform to the municipal development plan. And then just below the ASP level, we see that there are neighborhood plans. The two of these plans, ASP and NPs, will make up the city's new two-tier planning system. And the West ASP will be the first ASP that implements this new two-tier process. On this slide, we have a map that shows the location of how these plans are applied. We have the municipal development plan for the entire city, and then shown in the yellow, we have the area structure plans, which are typically 256 hectares in area or greater. And then followed by the area structure plans, we have the neighborhood plans, which are typically greater than 64 hectares. So on the screen, we see that there are two neighbor plans, and these are the plans that we'll be working on after this ASP has been completed. This is the project schedule. The green is representing the ASP process and the blue represents the NP process. As we can see, we are currently halfway through the ASP process. The first half dealt with a lot of in-depth review of city documents such as the MDP and master plans, as well as site analysis. We also had a series of engagement sessions with the internal and external stakeholders, Indigenous communities, landowners within the project area, and an open house with the general public back in May. And this first phase was to give us an opportunity to learn about the opportunities and constraints within the area. So for this month of October, we are having our second round of engagement. So that includes tonight's public open house. And we are here to present the land use concept and policy highlights for feedback. After this month, we will work on cleaning up all the maps, finalizing the policy document and preparing it for council approval in the new year, which is sometime in spring of 2023. At that time, we'll also work on the neighborhood plans for Lakeview Business District and Badgerlands and the servicing design for the Lakeview Business District. So that is the project schedule. I'll now pass it over to Scott to talk about what we heard.
Perfect. Thanks, Tracy, and good evening again. I have 3 slides here tonight to really talk about what we heard and what we did as part of our proposed area structure plan that we are going to talk about here tonight. That really came out of the spring sessions that Tracy mentioned, spring summer sessions. So the first slide in front of us tonight is really with respect to natural environment. And what we heard loud and clear was that protecting the natural environment as well as the wildlife habitat was extremely critical, and that land adjacent to Carrot Creek, Big Lake, and Sturgeon River must be protected. So as part of our area structure plan that we're proposing, we are designating, or we're proposing to designate it as major open space. In addition, areas will be retained as well as buffers and setbacks will be determined through site-specific technical studies when preparing the second level, the neighborhood plans that would be forthcoming later on down the line. Technical studies will also help determine ecological stepping stones, as well as those locations for wildlife crossings within the overall area structure plan. And in phase one, we heard some conflicting feedback regarding preserving everything south of Meadowview Drive as major open space versus providing it as employment lands in the area. Now, in saying that, Council has directed that the lands immediately south of Meadowview Drive and above the floodline be designated for employment. And this direction really aligns with the existing municipal development plan that's in place. So the second slide is with respect to transportation and land uses. On transportation, we heard that a network of trails connected to the rest of the city and region is important, especially around Big Lake. So we're not just looking at the trail connectivity in and around Big Lake, but within the overall ASP and how it would connect to existing St. Albert. While a trail network, and I think this is really important to understand, a trail network won't be defined as part of the area structure plan itself. We will have policy in the ASP documents that requires identification of the high-level trail network within each neighborhood plan that comes forward. The intent overall is to align with the Red Willow Park West Master Plan. We also received, as part of our phase one, feedback about providing development and services to meet the needs of both employees and residents, so residents within existing St. Albert. And in response, the area structure plan is proposing to provide a variety of commercial, recreational, and other services to be accommodated across the entire ASP area. And the third slide is more to do with the servicing and the technical pieces, in particular, the historical and cultural features. So in terms of servicing, drainage and other technical reports to support the area structure plan are currently underway and will determine the high-level utility network for the overall ASP. Exact sizing of the storm ponds, so you're going to see blobs of a bluish greenish color on the different figures. That will be, the exact sizing will be determined at the next stage at the neighborhood plan level. On a historic and cultural features, from that perspective, the province's historical resource mapping has indicated that a number of areas with high potential for historic resources are in and around Big Lake, and that will be addressed further through what is otherwise known as historical resources impact assessments, or SJOs. And we've also had Indigenous engagement as part of phase one, and we will continue that as part of phase two. We heard that a number of native and medicinal plants have been found and are used within the area. Proposed policy will encourage the retention of these plants where possible, and will encourage landscaping that incorporates these native plants in both public and private developments. And that's a very high level of our phase one, what we heard. And now I'm going to pass it over to Kyle, the main piece de resistance, to talk about the land use concept.
Great. Thanks, Scott. And yeah, as Tracy and Scott and Michelle mentioned, my name is Kyle Witu. I work with Stantec and am the planning lead on the project. So I'm going to hold you all in suspense for a little longer here and just talk about how we got to the land use concept that you'll be seeing, or you may have seen in preparation for this meeting. So the land use concept, what that is it basically helps to determine the types of development and activities that can happen and where in St. Albert West. A draft concept was prepared with the city's project team that brings together four things: municipal development plan and council direction, some information that was gathered early on in the project on opportunities and constraints in the area, some high-level desktop technical review, as well as stakeholder feedback through phase one, which Scott provided a bit of an overview on. So the first thing we did with that information was prepare a vision for the ASP. And that vision really helps to inform the land use direction and proposed policy that is proposed for the draft plan. The vision for St. Albert West is to be a strategically important area for St. Albert that helps achieve a sustainable tax base and is a significant employment generator for the city. It's to be a place that drives innovation and is home to the city's focus areas, namely advanced manufacturing, agribusiness, clean technology, construction, life sciences, and transportation and logistics. It's a place that will protect natural habitat and features like Carrot Creek, Big Lake, and Sturgeon River for the enjoyment of current and future generations. Provides a mix of residential, commercial, recreational, and other services to meet the daily needs of residents and serves those employment lands that we've been talking about a little bit. And finally, it's intended to be a place that's vibrant, walkable, and well connected to the rest of the community and region. So without further ado here, what you see in front of you is the proposed land use concept. And I'm going to really briefly walk through the different areas and talk a little bit about what all of the different colors mean. So starting off with the yellow areas, these are designated as neighborhoods. Neighborhoods are predominantly residential areas in the plan, comprising the majority of the Choureau and Avenir areas that are currently under the Choureau ASP. There's also a small amount of neighborhood area in the very northeast, might be a little difficult to see on this slide. The thing to note about this area is in accordance with the Edmonton Metropolitan Region Growth Plan, minimum density for the area must be set at 40 dwellings per net residential hectare. So what that gobbledygook means is basically that about 3,000 homes would be located within that area, translating to about 8,000 people. The other thing I want to note, and this came up in one of our other stakeholder sessions, is that there is intended to be a mixture of low density, medium density, and high density development within this area. So really intending to be for that Choureau Avenir area, intending to be consistent with all of the previous planning that has gone in to the Choureau area structure plan, not intending to change any of the intent of that area. Next up, we have the, depending on your opinion, purple or pink areas. These are employment areas, and employment areas comprise a fairly significant amount of land in the area, and really are intended to help the city achieve that non-residential tax base that I mentioned earlier. As also mentioned, the city's focus sectors will be a priority for the types of development sought in those areas, and particularly Lakeview Business District, which is right in the middle of the area. The area is intended to be developed with what is termed Class A industrial and office buildings. And the employment areas will capitalize on key connections to regional transportation corridors such as Anthony Henday Drive, Ray Gibbon Drive, Villeneuve Road, and the future Fowler Way up in the north. Mixed use employment areas, so these are the lighter pink areas or hatched areas, will provide some complementary commercial development to serve the employment lands and residents. They'll also accommodate some smaller scale light industrial and office development. And for the area that's just north of the CN rail line, that area has been designated as such, also in part to help provide a bit of a transition in development intensity to the residential areas to the north. Another really significant area of designated land use is what is deemed major open spaces. So these areas will help to protect areas around Carrot Creek, Big Lake, and Sturgeon River from development. They'll also provide school and park sites for residents. One thing I do want to note as well is that when we say major open spaces means open spaces that are intended to serve the entire city and St. Albert West area. When neighborhood plans are prepared, additional open space will need to be identified to create what's called ecological stepping stones to promote wildlife connectivity, as well as smaller, more community-based park sites. We also have mixed use areas, a small amount of mixed use area in orange in the north. This again aligns with the Choureau area structure plan that's already been approved and would encompass a mix of apartments, townhouses, retail, restaurants, other services, and maybe a mix of vertical mixed use, such as commercial on the ground floor with residential above, or more of your horizontal where there's commercial buildings next to residential housing. Lastly, alternate jurisdiction in gray. So this is another, and in fact, I think the largest amount of land base in the St. Albert West ASP. And this area includes Ray Gibbon Drive and parcels of land that are owned by the province, including Lois Hole Centennial Provincial Park. So while the city does not have authority to direct development on provincial lands, we have identified it within the plan to basically emphasize the desire for some partnership and collaboration between the city and province on land use development and ecological protections, among many other things. Also to note, Ray Gibbon Drive, while it's shown as alternative jurisdiction, some parts of that land that are shown on here are provincially owned and others are city owned. And the intent for that and designating it as alternate jurisdiction is really to ensure that we are able to, or the city is able to work with the province to protect that area for future expansion. Speaking of roads, we also wanted to share a bit about the transportation network that you see here. So the roads shown here connect the area to the region, to the rest of the city, and provide a bit of that big picture structure of roads within the future neighborhoods and employment areas. What you don't see here are local roads. So local roads would be identified through future neighborhood planning processes. Another item of note that has been raised quite literally yesterday by the city's transportation department is that there is a road in the southeast corner, and hopefully you can kind of see my cursor. If not, I'll jump back to it in a second. But in the very southeast, there is a road that's shown as a neighborhood road. That is actually through some of the city's transportation planning intended to be a crosstown road, so an arterial roadway. So we'll have to correct that on a future draft of this plan. Getting to the end here, I'm just going to really quickly breeze through some next steps. Tracy's touched on a lot of this already in terms of the process, but we're continuing engagement with a number of other stakeholders sessions this week. We're also collecting feedback through an online interactive map on Cultivate the Conversation. So that land use concept that you saw, there's an opportunity to go on there and drop some pins and provide some comments on a number of themes. We are, as Tracy mentioned earlier, we're targeting bringing a draft of the area structure plan to council for first reading sometime in the winter, likely winter next year. And following that, the plan will have to go to the Edmonton Metropolitan Region Board for a review. That review typically takes about 3 months. at which point a public hearing and council's second and third readings can proceed as well. So that's tentatively scheduled for the spring. And then following that, we would continue working on the Lakeview Business District neighborhood plan, as well as the Badgerlands neighborhood plan, and some of that servicing design for those neighborhoods. And all of that is planned to carry us through summer of next year. So I want to thank you for your time today on behalf of Stantec and the City of Edmonton project team. And I am going to close my big yap now and hand things over to Michelle to help facilitate some of our discussion here today. So thanks for bearing with me.
Thanks, Kyle. And I think you meant the city of St. Albert. But
City of St. Albert, yes.
We knew what you meant. While you've been talking, we have accumulated a couple of questions, and one of them is from Raf, and he is asking if there has been collaboration with the City of Edmonton regarding zoning, because south of 137th Avenue is residential housing, and the plan that is being shown here is to have industrial and commercial north of 137th Avenue. That makes, he's suggesting the zoning plan is not consistent, and he backs onto 137th Avenue and have the Horseshoe Creek next to him. He's not looking forward to massive commercial complexes behind him. And right now, Raf has a great view of the Northern Lights and doesn't want to substitute those with industrial floodlights. That's understandable, Raf. Who would like to talk about that? Is that you, Kyle, about talking about the industrial versus the residential in the 137th Avenue area?
Yeah, I can kind of start us off there, and then I'll likely pass things over to Tracy. So what is shown there in terms of employment lands is consistent with the municipal development plan for the City of St. Albert. That plan would have gone through a referral process with regional neighbors, including the City of Edmonton, for review and for them to kind of raise any red flags through that process. The Edmonton Metropolitan Region Board process will also be an opportunity for regional partners to review and sign off on the plan. So yes, so there will be ongoing conversations with the City of Edmonton to ensure alignment. In terms of impacts on adjacent properties, it's one thing that I think is very important in terms of the development of policy for those employment areas is ensuring that impacts, whether it be lighting, noise, dust, are contained to the site. So we have drafted policy that is being reviewed by the city right now, the City of St. Albert, that basically says for the employment lands, any of those nuisance impacts need to be self-contained within buildings or sites. Tracy, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add from the city's perspective, particular and maybe even just in terms of implementation from a land use districting process.
Nope. Thank you, Kyle. I think you touched on that question well. Just to add, with the policies around the Big Lake area, we recognize that that is an area that's environmentally sensitive and significant to this area structure plan. So the policies around development around Big Lake would have an emphasis on urban design that touches on dark sky, bird-friendly development. Those are sort of the key policies that we're emphasizing for built form around Big Lake.
And either Tracy or Kyle, maybe for people like myself, I'm not suggesting that others on the call don't understand this, but maybe the employment areas, maybe you could explain kind of what type of development you could expect in there. Like it's what it's not, what it could be. Are there some examples you could give?
The type of development that we envision for the purple employment areas is light industrial, professional office buildings. Some of the focus sectors that the city is prioritizing would include industries like agribusiness, clean technology, transportation and logistics, that sort of thing.
So would it be like Campbell Industrial Park?
Yeah, similar to Campbell Park. Yeah. For the mixed use employment areas, we envision a bit more commercial within those hatched areas. Commercial being a use that would serve as a complementary, secondary to the rest of the employment area to serve the employees within the adjacent employment areas.
Okay, thank you both. Ken has 3 questions. So we'll start with one, and then I'll pause to see if anybody has any additional questions before we continue on with the other 2. So Ken's first question is with respect to slide 19. Kyle, would you be able to bring up slide 19, please? He's saying that slide 19 is missing the mixed use employment area north of 137th Avenue, or has this been removed? Maybe it's just really light. I think I can see it, but
I don't believe we proposed a mixed use employment area in the area, southern part.
so that would be that
It isn't mixed use employment. It actually is the employment area on, I think it's the previous side, Kyle.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So there's some other questions that Ken has. Ken, bear with us. I'm just going to pause to see if somebody else has a question. Constance? Constance, please.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you for correcting me, and my
Yes.
apologies.
I just want to go to further on Raf's point, and that area we're speaking about, that island of employment area adjacent to 137th Avenue, that is isolated. This plan shows a change from the city's approved MDP insofar as the designation alternate jurisdiction seems targeted for recreation due to the environmentally significant sensitive nature of those lands. It's Alberta Environments in ownership, as I understand. And I understand that the intervening alternate jurisdiction between that employment area and Ray Given Drive is transportation related purpose. I believe the client for that area designated employment is interested in some sort of a residential accommodation and institutional type use, whether it's supportive living or whatever. That clearly type of institutional is not something that's contemplated in the city's approved MDP policies as they currently read. It's complementary institutions, and that opportunity for supportive living, things such as that. So a mixed employment or mixed use area would perhaps be a more appropriate consideration and a more compatible consideration given the residential south of 137th and Starling, as well as the environmental and the big lake considerations to the west.
So Constance, it sounds like you have some information that the rest of us don't have. You are aware of what is actually proposed for that area?
No, I'm saying at this point, because the city's not entertaining plans for this area, it's still in flux as this West ASP is developed. The landowner of that employment area that's shown adjacent to 137th Avenue in this morning's landowner engagement very clearly asked the question about type of institutional and opportunity for residential form like supportive living to be accommodated. That was not something that currently is contemplated in this plan. And given its context and with Starling to the south, that should be a consideration if in fact the city is not going to consider institutional of that type in an employment area.
So Michelle, that is correct. We had multiple meetings today, and one of the comments was about institutional. So for for a seniors facility of some type, not necessarily residential development. And that was a takeaway for us from earlier today to look into that. I wouldn't say it's an island, considering it has major transportation routes on both the south and east side. And while it graphically looks like an island, it is well suited from a transportation perspective, and from Ray Gibbon Drive and 137th Avenue.
Okay, thanks, Scott. So it sounds like maybe there was a undertaking from this morning that that the group isn't able to answer that question right now. Is that correct?
Yes, I was going to go back and talk,
Okay.
have internal discussions to understand institutional. The MDP, the intent of the institution definition in the MDP was that it would be more about development along lines of education, government type of uses. I'm not quite sure about residential, but we're going to discuss that internally and get back to the landowner.
Okay, thanks. It sounds like there was a conversation earlier today, and the answer is still pending. Constance, can we go on to another question and come back to you?
Yes, I just had one supplement response to Scott, and that we would differ on whether it is more of an island, as the area surrounding it in terms of the majority of the area synergistically doesn't quite support that type of light industrial or medium industrial that the current employment designation sets out in the MDP.
Well, okay. Thank you for that comment. I'm going to go back to, I believe the gentleman's name was Ken. His second question was, can any commitments be made in the ASP that administration will not invoke? Boy, you guys are way smarter than me. Section 5.1.13b to allow for encroachment on the MDP required setback for Carrot Creek and the Sturgeon River under section 5.1.13a. So I don't know if we are aware of what those sections are. That sounds like a question for the city.
I would just add, and I'll let Tracy or Christian specifically add to this, but we are, as part of our area structure plan, we are conforming to the municipal development plan, which specifically states 50-meter setback along the various environmentally sensitive areas. Now, one of the things typically is done is that that there is that setback requirements within the MDP. However, further technical work may be required by the city, and there could be slight delineations, etc., from that standard 50-meter setback. And Tracy, Christian, I'll defer to you if I said that correctly, or if there is anything.
I think Ken may have put his hand up. He may have a clarification on his question. Is that correct, Ken?
Yeah, that's correct. And I appreciate tonight's presentation. Scott, the reason that I brought this forward was that the MDP had just recently been approved back last year when council was confronted with a development at 230 Belrose Drive, otherwise known as Riverbank Landing. And in that particular development, they approved under bylaw 9 a 50-meter tall building within 17 feet of the bank of the upper bank of the Sturgeon River. And hence my reason for making this statement in that when I checked with the administration, they pointed out that section 5.1.13b allowed them to, in fact, permit the development inside the 50 meters. And if you've ever been up in that area, it's fairly significant in terms of providing oversight for the whole area of St. Albert. But this area in particular, Carrot Creek and the Sturgeon River, are very dear to me and a lot of residents. And I would like to think that under the MVP, because council expressly isolated Carrot Creek and the Sturgeon River for identifying setback, that at the very least that setback would be honored and no encroachment would take place. Hence my reason, my ask is whether in fact this ASP can be very much more definitive in terms of limiting any potential encroachment, because I know that within the environmental reserves, St. Albert and other municipalities are now allowed to put in stormwater water management facilities within those areas. And we see one example already on the Sturgeon River right beside the Riverside development. So that's a little bit of the background about why I raised the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Tracy, did you want to address that question?
Sure, and I'll read out section 5.113B. It starts off by saying require appropriate setbacks from identified natural features and lands considered unsuitable for development to be established as follows, based on the greater of a minimum 50-meter setback from top of bank of Carrot Creek, or as determined through appropriate studies and plans as deemed satisfactory by the city. The cost of supporting studies are responsibility of the applicant. So it's this policy is saying that the setback should be either 50 meter from the top of bank or less, depending on studies that identify a lesser setback. And yes, this policy would apply for all ASPs, including this West ASP. But yeah, for this area structure plan, we're pulling direction to apply the 50-meter setback. We see for the Choureau ASP, their setbacks are less than the 50-meter, and that's because they've done further studies to identify their ER being reduced. And so the setbacks may be adjusted at the neighborhood plan stage, depending on the studies.
Okay, thank you, Tracy.
So if I could summarize that, I think what you're saying, Tracy, is right now at the high or the mid-level, the area structure plan, we are utilizing the 50-meter setback that is based off the municipal development plan. When subsequent neighborhood plans come forward, subject to additional technical information like geotech, environmental, etc., there could be adjustments to the setback requirements.
Correct.
But they have to have other studies done.
A significant amount of studies completed at the NP stage to justify any change to setback requirements.
I saw, as soon as you said change, I saw Ken's hand go up. Ken, I recognize your hand. Please bear with us while we get to your comment. And Raf, I see you've added 2 more comments, and Ken, we still have another question in the chat. I would, just in the spirit of getting as many voices as possible, I'm going to go to Holly first, and then go ahead, Holly.
Thanks very much. Can you folks hear me just to make sure my mic is working? Yeah, perfect.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much. And thanks for the presentation. Really helpful information. So my name is Holly Campbell. I'm a senior consultant with Nichols Applied Management. We recently with ISL, with Connie, who's on the call as well, completed a market study related to non-residential lands in the city on behalf of the CityPort land holdings in the Lakeview Business District. Is everyone kind of familiar with where I'm talking about the CityPort land holdings? I have a map I could show as well, but it's sort of that part of the Lakeview Business District right along the right-hand, along Ray Gibbon, right along the right-hand side of the district. So my question is related to the potential for sort of redesignation of the employment lands contemplated for those CityPort lands. And I have just a few comments I'd like to go through to summarize our market study to provide some context. It should only take a few minutes. I'll try to go quickly so that I'm not putting anybody to sleep here. But essentially, we conducted this study to evaluate whether a shift in the land use designation for the CityPort lands to allow for large-scale commercial development would be consistent with market conditions in the city. What we found is that data with respect to the city's historical industrial and commercial land absorption as well as a recent market study that was commissioned by the city and completed by FBM, and our own growth analysis all suggest that there's an over-designation of industrial land in newly developed areas in the city and in the Lakeview Business District as well. This over-designation isn't necessarily driven by market conditions, but rather a city policy objective that's outlined in the NDP that looks to achieve a residential to non-residential tax revenue / assessment split of 70-30 for the city overall. And that's achieved in part by aiming for a split of 60-40 in newly developed areas. So that policy objective from our work, we think is pushing for this over designation of industrial lands. Furthermore, we're aware that that market study completed by FBM that I mentioned has been relied on for developing the land use concept for the West ASP. And I'd note that that study is projecting that the city will absorb about 17 gross hectares of industrial lands by 2030. And they suggest that about 7 of those hectares would be absorbed in the Lakeview Business District. So that's not necessarily pointing to a large short-term demand for industrial development. Additionally, that FBM study, historical data, and our own analysis has all suggested that the absorption of non-residential land in the city is relatively even between industrial and commercial development. And what we're seeing in this proposed land use concept is sort of a heavy favor to industrial uses, with commercial uses being restricted to more complementary or supplementary activities outside of that small mixed use employment area. But I'll also note that our impression was that that crosshatch mixed use employment area would allow for commercial activity beyond that complementary kind of designation.
Holly, can I interrupt you for a minute? It's almost like you're doing a presentation on your study, and I just want to give other people an opportunity to respond and react. So sorry, but I just have one question. When it sounds like your study is based on the premise that the policy is wrong, is that correct? You're saying that the policy is 70% residential, 30% industrial, and that's wrong? Is that?
We're not necessarily saying that it's wrong.
Okay.
But in completing kind of our market analysis, we're suggesting that there might be an optimistic objective with respect to industrial land development. It's not necessarily that the policy is incorrect, it's an objective. But the market conditions and analysis that we've completed suggest that the city port land holdings could be shifted in terms of their land use designation to allow for that larger scale commercial development. That would honestly still be consistent with the city's goal of increasing non-residential base.
Tax base.
Yes, tax base.
Okay, sorry. Not everybody is, it's hard to follow what you're saying because we haven't read the, and I apologize for interrupting. I'm going to let Kristen just step in here for a second.
And Michelle, we were made aware of this just late this morning of the information. I believe Christian has his hand up and probably.
Yeah, I've just asked him to
I don't
respond.
believe the information has been shared with the city.
Okay, it might be too much for this meeting,
Yeah.
I'm afraid, but just go ahead. Go ahead, Christian.
Sorry, just point for clarification. I typed it out in the chat section. The FBM report was a resident or an inventory of non-residential. It wasn't used for policy development in the MDP or the West ASP. So that point of clarification, the FBM report was conducted by our economic development department to look at current inventories for non-residential.
Okay, I was really impressed with your with what you're saying, Holly. It's you obviously know what you're talking about. I'm just like, whoa, it's going over my head here.
No problem. And yeah, I apologize. I am trying to summarize like a lot of information that we have in a very detailed report just to provide the context for the question, which is ultimately what would be the opportunity to.
So if I can just summarize, it sounds like you have a case for maybe changing some of these designations from industrial to commercial based on a study that you've done. I know I'm oversimplifying, but is that that's right? Okay. Okay, I want to get to Raf and I want to get back to Ken, but I see a new face popping up. And so just to diversify the voices, I'm going to ask Susan to chime in here.
Hi, thank you. My name is Susan Keating, and I am here as a resident of St. Albert, but also as a representative for one of the landowners. And I just have a question that's actually quite, I guess, off topic, sort of from the direction this meeting is headed. But a quick point of clarification on the new process with ASPs and the neighborhood plans. So an ASP, I understand, obviously is going to council, and then once it's approved, do neighborhood plans then also go to council when they come forward?
So you're asking about the approval process,
Yeah.
Tracy?
That's correct. ASPs go to council for approval, and neighborhood plans will be approved internally by our Director of Planning and Development.
Okay, and so then when you referenced, like as an example, there's the 50-meter setback, but it could be changed or modified based on reports. And this is just an example I'm using, but I guess I'm just wondering, you know, like how flexible really is the plan? Like when it shifts from a ASP down to a neighborhood plan, is there really going to be any opportunity to make changes, knowing that council approved the ASP? If people bring forward some adjustments or they're trying to take advantage of some of the flexibility, is administration really going to be empowered to kind of go down that flexibility path or be open to it if council's already approved the ASP as is?
Maybe Tracy, you could comment on the process that's required.
Sure. Yeah. So as we were developing a 2-tier system, it's new to the city. So there's a lot of question of how do we split up a single tier ASP into 2 levels now. So I think we're trying our best to meet in the middle between an MDP and the single tier ASP. There is flexibility for the ASP is intended to provide flexibility. Everything is conceptual. Come neighborhood plan, the neighborhood plan will have to conform to the area structure plan, of course. But for things like the resizing of a stormwater pond, if we're doing that, can be done at the neighborhood plan stage, that can internally reviewed. We don't need to go back to council to amend the ASP because it wasn't the right size initially. So the NP is meant to allow for details like this and in a more streamlined fashion rather than spending 6 months getting ready for council. And
okay, and then sorry, just one more follow-up. With respect to the land use, like there's obviously a fairly clear understanding of what, you know, residential is, but some of these other areas that are, you know, I appreciate that they're kind of a bit vague in nature, like employment area, mixed use area, in mixed use employment area. I guess I'm just wondering if the city's gonna, you know, if they're sort of just approaching all of those areas as kind of like non-residential, and that there will be some, you know, market and neighborhood specifics, kind of, you know, attention paid to what the needs are of the community and of the residents at the time of development, like, or are we kind of really sticking to a really defined definition for what is meant by employment area, or will administration be able to kind of interpret that at the, you know, in the appropriate way at the right time?
Yeah, thank you for the question. For example, the residential, we only show one color, so that would represent all the densities, but come neighborhood plan, all of that residential will be divided up into low, medium, and high density. Our yellow neighborhoods also will incorporate, or we will be allowed to see commercial within the neighborhood lands. Mixed use area would also include commercial. So a lot of the land uses that we see at the ASP are kind of combined or more broadened.
There's a high level, and then there's policies within that. Susan, I'm going to interrupt you and go to some of the other questions just because we have only a half hour left, but hold on to that thought. We'll come back to you. Ken, you had a question, which was, what are the height restrictions for buildings in mixed use employment areas?
I do. I do have a question about that, but I'd like to back off that and just come back to this thing
Can
about,
you just wait? Let's just try to get through all of these questions.
okay, well,
So-
it's about the setbacks. That's my issue.
Right. Yeah. So let's answer your question about what are the height restrictions for buildings in mixed use employment areas? Who can answer that?
Our-
I'll take it. I'll take a stab at that. At this point in time, heights are not addressed in the area structure plan, but would be more of a land use bylaw consideration along with neighborhood planning, which would define those locations for medium and high density residential.
There's
So
no height restrictions.
I'll also mention just Kyle, just to supplement that. And hi, Ken. Nice to see you. It's pretty atypical to see industrial usage go above 1 story. I don't think there's a whole lot of multi-story industrial uses within Canada within that context. So it's pretty atypical to go above a 10-meter 1-story type of industrial class A industrial use.
Thanks, Christian. And sorry, just hang in here, Ken. We'll get back to your setback question. Raf had a follow-up on the 137th Avenue light industrial zoning response. Would it be possible to revisit zoning for residential? That would be better suited for the area, in his opinion, especially as it's next to the provincial park. Who wants to take that one? So we're talking about this little bit. You can't see my cursor. Yes. Is that a question for the team?
It's
Is it
something that can
possible?
be taken under, it's something that can be taken under consideration, but the intent of the area structure plan is to focus on, overall the employment perspective. And so we can take that into consideration, but we can't confirm that that would be something that would be moved forward with.
Okay. Thank you. Constance, you've had your hand up patiently. Thank you so much for waiting. Apologies.
No problem. I wanted to go to the Lakeview area, and there have been comments made by the team that the West ASP aligns with the MDP. There are some subtle changes in how land use is designated, in particular in the Lakeview area. So I'll just make mention of the fact that in the city's own MDP, the area west of Range Road 260, which is north of CN Rail, that little triangular area, was an employment area. I'm asking for the city's flexibility to extend that mixed use employment area south of the CN Rail line, adjacent to Ray Gibbon Drive, to recognize that potential for the commercial market opportunities. As I understand it, that the city has not done a market study to support in particular the designations at this ASP level. As Holly Campbell spoke earlier, there has been one done for the city port lands within the Lakeview area. And that pointed to a more even split between industrial and commercial uses. Furthermore, the city doesn't in the MDP define what these various terms of employment area and mixed use employment area are. Rather, in the preamble to policy and in policy, land uses are suggested or are spoken about, but there are no clear definitions. There should be definitions in this ASP for clarity for owners so that they understand what the implications are of it moving forward. And I would also go further to say that the city's own FBM study, as I understand Holly Campbell's point, pointed to a relatively even split as well between industrial and commercial use. And I go further to the Edmonton Metro Regional Growth Plan, which exists and is in operation, and the definitions that are provided there with respect to local employment area. In that definition, that speaks specifically to localized area with industrial, commercial, and or institutional land uses that have locally significant business and economic activities that generate employment and growth for the city of that nature. So we would suggest that that be direction given to the team for definitions and their policy framework for this ASP. And we would support extending that mixed use employment area within the Lakeview Business District adjacent to Ray Gibbon Drive, south of the CN Rail, to recognize the commercial market opportunities. And on behalf of that landowner, current investment interest of a commercial nature, larger scale than what the city's discussion about what complementary commercial means would suggest would be allowed. So we need some clarity on that. And we think there is clarity coming from the regional growth plan, which provides direction to the city MDP, but which city MDP doesn't include definitions of these terms.
Thank you, Constance. And as mentioned at the beginning, this meeting is being recorded and it's also being transcribed. And so your comments and that definition that you provided will be in the transcripts. Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to Ken. Ken, do you want to talk about setbacks?
Yeah, this presentation has been very useful, if only because I've come to better understand the separation of ASP from neighborhood plans, because as far as I understand, is that the ASP now will set out general boundaries, but the neighbor, and it's subject to public review. However, the neighborhood plans, outside of perhaps people living within 1 and 100 meters of the affected area, nobody else in St. Albert will be aware of what is being proposed. And hence my reason about the MDP setting out, in particular, setbacks for Carrot Creek and Sturgeon River in particular, in addition to general green areas, where they talk about 50 meters. And what I understood Trace to say was that it is possible that when the neighborhood plan comes forward, that administration could exercise the privilege under that section that I mentioned, 5113B, to go ahead and allow for encroachment on that 50 meters. What I find interesting here is that in the presentation, it was pointed out that council was very specific with regards to those employment lands south of Meadowview Drive, that they lands north of the flood area would be employment lands. And in this regard, all I'm asking is, given this breakup between ASP and neighborhood plans, might it not be appropriate to build into the ASP at this point that there is direction that the 50-meter setback is a given, and if anything, that it could be wider than that, because right now that particular 5113B says develop any developable land. Well, between you and I could get a lot of landfill and I could fill in that creek and it would be developable. It wouldn't be publicly acceptable, but I'm just saying at a ridiculous end, hence my reason for saying that I want explicit direction given to administration that they cannot jump onto that 50-meter setback. And as Tracy pointed out, they've already done it with Carrot Creek with the Sherroot ASP. So okay. I got some real concerns here that best of intentions are all for naught in that MDP. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. So you really want to keep that 50-meter setback. And what I'm hearing is that under the current policies and guidelines, if there is sufficient studies done as there was in that other area, then there could be an encroachment on that. So again, I'm not sure there can be anything added. We've heard you, and I appreciate it, and thank you for your patience too. Susan, hang on there. We're going to get back to you. I want to get to, or sorry, Tracy, did you want to add anything? I shouldn't.
I have nothing further to add. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Tracy. I know you're listening, so I appreciate that. Raf has a question. Could you please provide the approximate length and width? Oh, this is a great question. Could you please provide the approximate length and width of the purple rectangle north of 137th Avenue? Kyle, you did a great example, I thought, being a non-planner, not understanding what's some of this lingo. You did a great job of explaining density, I thought, when you're talking about the neighborhood area. Can you also explain what this area, the size of this area, and to help
Now we're
Sorry.
getting into territory where I'm going to have to break out my protractor here.
Yeah.
I do not have the length and width of that area offhand, but if folks give me a couple of minutes,
Why don't
I can.
You know
I
what,
can
Kyle?
look that up.
We could provide that directly to Tracy, and Tracy could provide that. I know we have representation on this call for the landowners in this area. They might have that, but we can provide that information. Unfortunately, we don't have that level of detail at this stage. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Sorry. Sorry about that, Raf. Susan, we'll go to you and then we'll go back. There's another question in here about consultation.
Sure. Sorry. Yeah, I was pretty much finished when we were chatting before, but I just wanted to make the point. I think my question was interpreted as it applies to the residential area, but I was also just in general stating the importance of, at this kind of high level, making it as flexible in the employment and mixed use areas as possible, so that administration would feel empowered and comfortable to kind of approve something at the neighborhood plan based on the ASP not being too rigid. So I would also support what Connie suggested about having that that kind of flexible mixed use area extended along Ray Gibbon Drive, instead of just in that kind of northeast corner of the purple area in the middle, if you will. So that was the last point I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Michelle,
Sorry,
if
go
I
ahead,
could
Scott.
add, I completely agree with Sue about flexibility, and that is what we're trying to ensure. I mean, when we're getting into items, I can't speak to the MDP. The MDP is a separate topic, and we weren't involved in it. But when we're getting into items of like drilling down into exact definitions, I think that's where we're at an ASP stage. Generally, ASPs don't have definitions. Yes, MDPs do, etc. But when we're drilling down right to the specifics, that's where we generally have those issues. And so we are trying to ensure, as part of the planning process here, whether it's ASP, it's providing some guidance, but there is opportunity for some flexibility.
Okay, thanks, Scott. I see your hand, Constance. I'm going to go to Raf's question in the chat. What consultation or communication have you had with the Big Lake Environmental Support Society, BLESS? Will there be special care working next to Horseshoe Creek? So I can say, having facilitated some of these meetings, that there has been strong representation from BLESS at these meetings, and a lot of discussion about setbacks. I don't know exactly about any comments they might have made on Horseshoe Creek. Definitely Carrot Creek they've raised. Michael, is Michael Keating, did you put your hand up? Are you a member of BLESS?
No, I'm not. I would just.
You have another question? Okay, sorry.
Question. Go ahead and finish what your point.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Michelle, I think we have Tony on the call.
I thought so too.
Yeah,
Tony,
we do. Have
okay,
Tony
there
on
you
the
are.
call.
Tony, do you want to explain the representation of BLESS and some of the comments that you may have raised with respect to Horseshoe Creek? And hi, Tony.
Hello. I was just listening. I wasn't. I thought you had enough of me this morning, actually.
Well, I wasn't there, so I.
Oh, sorry. Well, they kept stopping me and letting somebody else speak then. But anyway, we haven't actually on this issue. We haven't been, you know, the plan doesn't actually affect Horseshoe Creek as such. Horseshoe Creek comes in just west of the area that you were talking about, the rectangle down in the bottom corner. By the way, it's 60 acres is the size of it. Anyway, and then it goes across, across what is the future park area. So on this thing, we obviously want to preserve Horseshoe Creek. We're working with the province to try and get a bridge built over it for the trail system and to enhance the connections down to the Starling neighborhood. I don't know whether there's very much else I can say about that issue. We would love one of the Big Lake people, the Residents Association is on our board. She would love to, if you get in touch with them, I'm sure she'd love to talk with you, Raf. Actually, Raf, we've had some communication out there, I believe, over the mowing that went on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And yes, Raf is recognizing, yes. Constance, I'm going to go to Michael first, and then we'll go to your question. Michael, go ahead.
Yes, it was just earlier discussion of a few comments made about flexibility, which I think is great, and that the area structure plan wasn't meant to be too specific. But I was concerned with the term that was complementary commercial when some earlier on there was discussion about the city port lands, mostly the north node. And Kyle had mentioned something about that. And I wanted to just to get clear in my mind, what does complementary commercial actually mean? And is it commercial then that is just related to the balance of Lakeview Business Park or district? Or is it broader than that?
Thank you for your question. The MDP's intent for mixed use employment node, so the commercial within that employment area, is that it is secondary. So it's to serve the employees within the adjacent employment areas. It's not so much a regional sort of use, but more to serve the local needs of the employees in the area.
So nothing to complement the neighborhoods in the area. And so we're talking about a coffee shop.
Could be, yeah. Could be a restaurant, yeah. Could be a gym.
So anyway, that doesn't sound right to me, but then, so by using that term, does that kind of lead the ongoing process down that road? And, you know, Scott had just mentioned as well, and Susan had some great comments about, you know, keeping a good level of flexibility. And I think if we have that type of a term sort of set in stone now, it makes it hard for us to get back onto that, the idea of something a little bit more highway commercial type and or regional shopping. You know, we have a long list of well-known companies and names that you're all familiar with that have given us letters of interest and want to move forward, you know, love this location. A lot of them have other locations within St. Albert already. And we haven't really even been marketing very hard because there's just too many unknowns in terms of timing and what we're going to be allowed to do. But I just sort of added it up, you know, we probably taking about half of this list that I have, we're already up to using approximately 45 to 50 acres of land to service these uses and these prospective tenants and owners. And so there certainly is demand there, and that kind of leads to the thinking the highest and best use of this land is definitely more on the commercial side. So that's really my point, was that if we really are going to be flexible and we are going to be able to respond to some of these businesses that no doubt the politicians, the community, the public at large are going to want to have in their community, we should make sure that we're putting together a document that will allow us to entertain those opportunities in a timely fashion.
Thank you for your comments, Michael. Did you mention a city port?
Well, that's what we are calling what would be considered the gateway to Lakeview Business District is the more or less 85 acres running along Ray Gibbon. That is, we now call that City Port.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your comments. I don't know if there's anybody wanted to reiterate or respond to those comments. Otherwise, we'll go to Constance.
I'll pick up where Michael left off, just for context. In the Lakeview
Are you guys
area.
tag teaming each other?
Well, because City Port is something that I'm involved with as well as Holly Campbell, and where we're looking at a better split in terms of commercial opportunity and industrial overall within the Lakeview area to recognize.
I've heard that today.
This is going beyond this, though, for context. Let's take a look at the Lakeview area. And I think Raf asked questions about area. When we look at the Lakeview area, the mixed use employment area that is showing in the West ASP is about 86 acres, more or less. The dedicated employment area south of the CN tracks is about 558 acres, more or less. And what we're asking for is for the city group is asking for is that mixed use employment opportunity that would accommodate a better range of commercial opportunity that's beyond complementary and larger scale, as Michael has said, because truly City Port would have about 58 acres. And I can't imagine that 58 of 558 acres in an employment area going to mixed use employment as opposed to sitting there south of the tracks as employment area is going to be a consequential difference when the commercial opportunities are there today to be realized and acted on. So I would go further and close off by saying that if this isn't recognized in terms of the background that we've provided at the landowner meeting this morning again, and then today, as a mixed use employment opportunity area with that broader range of commercial, we would have to speak in opposition to this plan if this concept were to return to council for first reading and a public hearing.
Thanks, Constance. Have you had conversations with the city about this? Like, it sounds like you raised these issues this morning. You're raising them again this evening. You've talked to the city? Okay.
Yes, and
okay.
prior to answer your question, prior to the MDP being approved, commercial opportunity adjacent to Ray Gibbon Drive on the city group lands was looked at prior to the MDP being approved. And there were discussions as far back as that. And
okay.
From my involvement, 2021, in May of 2021, we talked about these opportunities being mixed use and with a commercial emphasis, not industrial.
Okay, well, thank you again.
Sorry, can I just confirm the exact location of the City Port lands? Because this is all new information to us as of today. The City Port lands, confirm the location.
Right, it would be the area that is south of south of Giroux, and it is immediately adjacent to Ray Gibbon Drive, extending south and as far south as McKinney.
I think it's the mixed use area there that's north of the railroad tracks.
It's a combination of mixed use and employment.
That's right, with the larger part of it being employment area, which is the case.
So it goes south of the tracks.
And Constance, would you say that it's parallel, adjacent to Ray Gibbon?
We would.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And when you say City Port, it's Coda Lands, or is that a new name, or?
That is a new name, but Coda is involved, and that is how the area is being marketed, I believe, is what Michael had said. Michael, if you can elaborate.
Yeah, no, that's true. It was designated or distinguished between the total Lakeview Business District, came up with this name City Port, and originally it was known to be the Coda lands. But
Dave, I see you have your hand up.
Hi there, Dave. I'm with City Port. Just to answer Scott's question more clearly, So
Who here is not with Cityport?
so the Cityport lands are in between Ray Gibbon Drive and Range Road 260, going from Drew all the way down to McKinney.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I'm seeing that the time is 7:21. We have 9 minutes left. And I don't know if Tracy, you have some additional comments? Oh, Constance, you're not going to raise issues you've already raised this morning, have you? That have been okay. Then you're allowed to say something.
Thank you. I note in the process for development of this ASP that this is the last engagement prior to the full plan going to council for first reading and then being referred on to the EMRB for their approval. My concern is that we've talked about a lot of things related to land use. We've not seen the full plan as a draft ASP with the policies that have been spoken to by both Kyle and Scott. And I think it would serve the city and the landowners, the public interest, to allow us another engagement opportunity to see and to provide feedback on this plan so that we're not left to, after an EMRB approval, have to speak at a public hearing, which may make it less of an opportunity or inclination of the city to make any further amendments. So I'm concerned about that lost opportunity, and I would suggest that we should see the full draft plan with the policies that relate to what we've talked about tonight, and to see explicitly what changes have been made prior to the first reading.
Thanks, Constance. So I believe this is in the schedule. Tracy, did you you showed that this is the last engagement, is that correct?
Yeah, this is the last sort of face-to-face engagement, but yeah, the ASP document, when we continue working on the policies and finalizing the document, it will be shared online as part of the first reading package, and I believe on our Cultivate the Conversation website as well. So I'll send I'll send a notification of when that is posted.
Thank you, Tracy. We have a question from Raf with respect to Indigenous consultation. What has taken place so far with Indigenous peoples? And he's referring to, I believe you're referring to Métis, First Nations, as well as Inuit. Tracy, do you want to take that question?
Thank you. Good question. Over the 2 phases of engagement, we have engagement sessions with the Indigenous community specifically as well. So in phase 1, we've heard from them through a similar engagement session like this one, as well as a site visit that we did with the communities around the project area. Got a lot of good feedback. A lot of their feedback was related to the native plants in the area and protecting them for ceremonial purposes. So that's one of the policies that we have, is to encourage the protection of those plants. And, that way the developers that come in are aware. Those plants are located primarily along the CN rail. So, we have another session tomorrow evening with the Indigenous communities. So it will be part of the phase 2 engagement sessions, and we'll be presenting them something similar that we are doing tonight with them tomorrow evening.
Thanks, Tracy. Indigenous consultation came up early in the project as something that was required by the city. Thanks for your question, Raf. Okay, Tony and Constance, 2 final questions, 5 minutes. Don't go over 5 minutes or you'll ruin my reputation. Go ahead, Tony.
I just wanted to agree with what Constance has suggested. I think we need another full scale. In fact, I'd like a live, what I would call a proper open house, where we can have all the public come in and have a look at the final plan before it goes to council, and then make their comments. Because what we're making the comments on now is a half-finished plan. It's going to be changed. I think we need another full range of public consultation once it's finalized.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate it.
Tony, did you just want to see me in person? Is that what it was?
Oh, exactly. And yeah. I also Connie there. Connie and I go back even further than you and me and Scott, actually.
Yes.
Go ahead, Constance, you have the floor.
Well, just for the, I agree with what Tony's saying, and to reinforce my point, without the engagement of the type that Tony's talking about and I'm asking for, there's no opportunity for public comment, feedback until the public hearing stage. And at that point, it's too late. And I don't think the intent is to delay, but rather if this could be put out quite quickly and people could see how comments have been interpreted and reflected in the plan. And I go to one point again, what on earth is complementary commercial and what does that mean in terms of commercial scale, regardless of what's designated where? Definitions are not in the MDP. We're still left up in the air as to what the policy intent will be in this plan until we see a full draft and can comment on it.
Thank you, Constance. Okay, so thank you very much for your comments. As mentioned, this has been recorded as well as all the comments transcribed. You've given these guys a lot of things to think about. Tracy, did you have any closing comments before we sign off?
No, but thank you very much for attending. All the feedback is very helpful for us. We'll be preparing all of the feedback that we're receiving into a What We Heard report, and that will be posted on our website as soon as it is ready. And we also have, as Kyle mentioned, we have that interactive map online through the Cultivate the Conversation website for more feedback, and that's live until October 28th.
Thank you, Tracy. And thank you all for making my job enjoyable. I appreciate hearing from all of you. You are all very intelligent people that I have a hard time keeping up with, and really appreciate your time and attention. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Go enjoy the
Thank you,
warm
everyone.
weather.
Bye.
Thank you.
Okay, Ralph left his email address for the dimensions of